I like self-experimentation. So like,
Oh yeah.
and I went down the rabbit hole on niacin. So um I was like, yeah, I think I want to dig up all those resources again and see how I can apply it to my own life.
What did you find when you started taking it?
So I was originally taking it because I've been struggling with some relatively severe gut health issues.
Mm,
I shouldn't say that. The gut health issues were not severe. They were chronic and frustrating, but the mental health effects from it were severe.
right.
And so if you've gone down the rabbit hole, I presume you have with niacin or
A bit.
okay. So then there's what I found was are you familiar with Abram Hoffer?
Nope. Or
Okay, so
maybe not
there's
by name. I'm not good with names, by the way.
okay, that's
So
okay. Yeah, yeah, that's okay. So
yeah.
he was a famous Canadian psychiatrist, and he was friends with oh man, this guy's even more famous, so I should know his name. The guy who started AA,
Oh, okay.
Alcoholics Anonymous, and
Right.
they were good friends. And initially, when he started AA, founded it, I guess. He wanted niacin to be part of the 12 steps, and it was initially, but they pulled it out. But the idea was that you could, with high dose niacin, you could, in theory, I guess, positively affect the depression from the
Mm,
alcoholism. So the idea was the initial steps that they had without the niacin was sufficient to treat the addiction part.
hmm.
So it actually helped people with alcoholism. Great. But then what he found was is there's a lingering mental health issue, primarily depression in alcoholics and recovering alcoholics that was not improved. So then that's where the niacin they found was helping some people. So it was interesting. So I went
Interesting.
down that rabbit hole and I was like, and then there was another guy that I found over the COVID things that the COVID stuff where he was talking about niacin and how it affects mitochondrial function and general health and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, maybe there's something here, you know?
Hmm. It's
Yeah.
it's funny. I've had like cholesterol as part of my life for my whole life. I have a genetic
Okay.
cholesterol condition,
Okay.
and my mom found an old book from like 1985 or something that was essentially like a niacin based cholesterol study,
Yep.
and they had experimented with niacin and lowering cholesterol and that kind of thing. And so I'm on. I mean, I've taken pretty much every kind of cholesterol drug over the years and experimenting and whatever.
Yep.
But and so my levels are very monitored, and I wanted to see, does niacin make a difference?
What did
So
you find?
very slightly. And I
Okay.
have kind of a unique situation in that my liver doesn't have the receptors required to remove cholesterol from my bloodstream,
Gotcha.
and a lot of cholesterol medications, treatments, interventions work via those receptors. So I thought, well, if it works moderately for somebody, it might work in a small amount for me. And I found maybe about a half of a milligram total cholesterol lowered with niacin
Okay.
use, and just
Okay.
500 milligrams at bedtime.
Okay.
Because what I found was I could fall asleep faster than the niacin would hit
Hmm.
mostly, and then I could sleep through it. But then I experimented going to a gram
Yeah.
after, a few months, still slept through it, bumped it to 1500 and just hated my life.
You
Because
got
it,
the flush.
oh, yeah, it had to be full, because full flushing was all that there was. And
Yeah.
to my understanding, the non-flushing niacin essentially doesn't have any of the benefits, or most of the benefits don't come
That's
without
my
the flushing.
understanding as well. And what I've seen is that appears to be the most popular as well, right?
Of course, because it
Yeah.
sucks.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
now, when you say high dose niacin, what kind of doses are you playing with, or were you
Like
experimenting with?
if I think what did I get to? I might have got to 2 grams a day,
Ugh.
like acutely, but again, I think the way my body was processing it was just based on the observation as I was taking it and kind of the differences on when I would take it on certain days or whatever,
Sure.
that it would severely impact the flush. So it's like some days I would take 500 and I'd be wrecked. I was like, oh my goodness, I can't feel my feet. My wife
Yeah,
she took 500 one time and her feet went purple.
of course.
Yeah, it was pretty wild. And I had some crazy full body flushes that were straight up like almost unmanageable. But then
Yeah.
yeah, but I worked up to like a gram and a half or 2 grams, maybe a little while. but I didn't notice anything. I'm more interested in like, I think I'd be more interested in chronic low to moderate dosage with pulsing high doses 4 times a year.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? That's my plan moving forward, or something like that.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
It's I would guess it's pretty hard to be depressed when you've got 2 grams of niacin in your system. Like, that's you're
you got
distracted
you got
by
something else to focus on.
oh, there's no doubt about it. You cannot miss that sensation in your body.
Mhm.
So good luck.
Did you get a sense of euphoria at all from the flush?
No, it mostly honestly, it was a good test of my patience and my breath work and my
Mm,
I call it stillness, I guess, but because I took it at bedtime, and when I got into that 1,500 milligram dose, like I would fall asleep and then be woken up again,
mm.
and then just be like in this state of fuck, right,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
wanting to go back to sleep, but you can't think about going back to sleep because then you never go back to sleep. So it's
yeah.
kind of that whole like there's I don't know of a way to decrease the time or the duration that that flush lasts, and so I just laid there like, "Ooh, yeah, this sucks."
Yeah,
Right? But
yeah,
then that's it. See how
yep,
long it and then eventually I did fall back asleep.
yep,
But, it was most of it was in my face
yep,
and, hands, my lips and stuff.
yep, yep,
I
yep.
never noticed much in my feet, but
Okay, yeah, I found taking it 20-25 minutes after a meal was good because I'd still got a flush, but it was a little less aggressive than
yes.
empty stomach.
And that's one of the sort of game aspects of bedtime use is if you don't eat within that much time of bedtime, it fucking hits hard. So,
It'll hit you. It'll hit
yeah,
you. Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
But anyways, I don't know of anybody else that's really played with niacin and specifically the non-flushing. And
Mhm.
so I found that very interesting. It's like, oh, what are you? I'd never heard of the mental aspects or the potential cognitive
Honestly,
change.
that's
Yeah.
like the biggest things. Like, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, I actually have, if I'm being honest, I haven't noticed any difference when I took it, when I didn't, whatever. But I want to continue to experiment with it just because of like the theoretical mechanisms around it, as far as what we
Hmm.
know it definitely does at a cellular level. So it's like, as far as like affecting mitochondria, we know that most disease, if not all, are like some type of dysfunction at the mitochondria. Then it's like, if I can make sure they have some of those building blocks, then that might be a smart insurance for just health long term
Hmm.
across a ton of different, disease processes. So that's kind of how I look at it, almost like a, the reason people take a multivitamin is really that's what they're looking for, is like general health. And like, I feel like I could probably do that with, I could cover a bunch of those bases with just chronically making sure my niacin stores are up.
Hmm.
From like looking at basically two outcomes. It's like I want to support long-term mental health outcomes, and uh I guess I don't want to say disease prevention, but I guess disease risk reduction.
It's like all
So
cause mortality, sort of,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I did find too, there's a lot of stuff on circulation and long term health of your vascular system, which I find,
Hmm.
well, and actually in ED,
Yep.
there's some treatment in there as well. But then I don't know. Do you know Paul Stammet, the mushroom guy?
Yes. Yeah, yeah.
Right? But he talks about using niacin, flushing niacin with low dose or moderate dose psilocybin and some lion's mane to
I
help
saw
with
that
nerve
recently.
damage, right?
Yes.
Like now that's intriguing. And just in sense of like nerve damage, but then also I'm thinking in brain function and neural pathways and
Yep.
what can we because really niacin does go everywhere, right? And
Yep.
so what else can it bring with it as sort of a shuttle? And that's quite intriguing
That's and
as you're
he
as
d
you're
dude, that's exactly it. I saw that video and I thought I understand a lot of stuff can be theoretical, so you can't always
yeah,
be like, "Okay, this does this." But the theory is interesting and it's fun to talk about and it's fun to consider, right?
yeah,
Um, and I thought he laid out a pretty good case for it when it's neuroplasticity that psilocybin will help with, right? Correct? So he was
correct.
kind of making the case for that and then being like, okay, we know it does something positive in regards to neuroplasticity. And then niacin, when combined, in theory, may help with the transportation method. And I was like, that's pretty
Absolutely.
cool, you know? So I don't know.
Well, long-term health of your vascular system is another great aspect of long-term health.
Mhm.
right? Like calcification of arteries or heart function, and
Yep.
and the cholesterol is kind of part of that whole situation sometimes too. But
Yep.
it's anyway, not a lot of people go down the niacin rabbit hole, but I definitely made a pin in my hat when I gotta ask you
Nice.
your side. Yeah,
Yeah.
because it's uncomfortable, and most people are just fuck this one time, I'm done,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So,
and I think it's one of those things where, because I like to look at these things as objectively as possible, especially more fringe health stuff, which I'm interested in,
mhm,
but looking at it from a reasonably objective perspective, because there's a lot of, I think, in like the alternative slash fringe health space, they get some things right and they get a lot of things wrong. And I think if I was if I was not me and I was kind of skeptical, a reasonable take would be like, okay, you felt nothing except something negative and uncomfortable. So then what's the point? Right. So the way I look at it is like, I always just go back to the fact of, at least the mechanism of action of what we know niacin is responsible for. And then thinking about all of those things are problems in the modern world for
mhm,
most people. So I'm like, it just seems like, and it's affordable. It's also affordable. And
yeah,
even though it's uncomfortable, it's low risk. I know a lot of people bring up like potential liver damage because there's research on that, but that appears to be done with almost all of the niacin derivatives that
mhm,
are not flush. They're not full flush niacin. So
yeah,
nicotinamide, riboside, or whatever all those other ones are.
yeah.
So I think if you stick with full flush niacin, it's probably a safer route.
So what else, as kind of a side thought to that, what else have you noticed benefits from on that fringe health space for yourself? Like in terms of
Mhm.
experimenting, what are you like
So,
promote for yourself? Not necessarily
yep,
for everybody, but
yep. So for me, and this could apply to a lot of people in the modern world, I think too. I naturally, and this probably ties into some of your questions actually. I I'm someone who's inherently kind of type A, obsessive, neurotic, um, analysis by paralysis. The default is to think, not to
mhm,
not think. So that can be a double-edged sword. And part of that, coupled with some actual relatively severe mental health issues in the past, I think, I look at it like, for me, one of my biggest focuses from like a nutritional perspective, including vitamins, minerals, supplementation, whatever, nutrition in general, is like supporting as much relaxation neurotransmitters as I can.
mhm.
So I'm trying to support GABA production as much as I can. And that seems to really, really help a ton, because then I help my sleep, helps my mood. Um, I'm way more even keel, way more than I even was on SSRIs. Um, and Yeah, that seems to be a really good one. So specifically, what I found to be helpful is like right now I supplement taurine,
Mhm.
which is great for liver function as well, a bunch of and brain health, but specifically it helps with GABA production.
And
Uh,
dopamine, I think too, does it
yep,
not?
yep,
Yeah,
dopamine too, yep, and then
yeah.
L-theanine. L-theanine's really good for GABA
Mhm.
production, magnesium. So those are like three of my go-tos that I keep in the mix, in the stack, and I'll probably keep them in forever to some extent, in some form, in some dosage. Yeah.
Versus an actual GABA supplement, you'd go more of the precursors to support the system itself.
So I'll take GABA as well. Yeah, yeah. I don't take GABA full time just because I haven't noticed it be
Mhm.
more effective. So then, yeah, I just look at, and I'm sure I could, because there's no the risk there is relatively low as
Yeah.
well. But yeah, I have GABA as well, but I kind of undulate that, kind of periodize when I'm taking it. But other than that, it's like, and I've recently started taking melatonin again after looking. I've gone down a melatonin rabbit hole, which I knew a bit about in the past, but
Right.
I didn't actually understand the importance of its antioxidant effects.
Mm.
Very, very potent. Uh,
Specifically on the brain, I think.
yes, yes, exactly. So it's really, really good to combat oxidative stress, which we're all going to be under to some extent. And as someone who's like struggled with sleep in the past, and then knowing that melatonin doesn't suppress endogenous production long term,
Mm.
that's like a huge factor, right? Because a lot of people think that it's like the same as taking like testosterone or something. It's
Right.
not, even though you are dealing with a hormone.
Yeah.
Interestingly, um yeah, your body will produce melatonin after you cease to continue taking it, which I've taken it a year straight in the past and had no problems coming off it. I just stopped.
Mm. And I
So
think I've been taking melatonin every night for 4.5 years, something like that.
Oh yeah. What dosage?
10 milligrams.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
very interested in the dosaging because the guy who I listened to a podcast about the guy, I guess, who was able to identify melatonin. Um, the founder of melatonin, not
Yeah.
really, but he was the one that was able to discover it, I guess. And he has a very conservative take on that, which I followed for a while, which you're probably
Mhm.
aware of, right? Where he was saying like most, the pineal gland releases something like zero point 0.1 to zero point 0.3 micrograms or
Yeah.
something like that. So he recommended somewhere around zero point 0.3 micrograms. So I was when I was on for a year, I would take between zero point 0.4 and 0.75 micrograms.
Mhm.
But from my what I've been reading about more, which is really interesting, is a lot of people have theorized that higher doses are actually really important for the antioxidant effect.
Mm.
And actually, a lot of people, this is something that I'm kind of open minded to shifting my beliefs on now, is a lot of people will suggest taking lower dose if you feel the classic grogginess after, but some people will suggest actually go higher. It's
Sure.
actually a problem with too low of a dose. So I don't know.
Anecdotally, what I find, and this could just be a combination of stress offloading at bedtime and these kinds of things, but every day about, well, before bed, I'm more vascular than I am at any other point in the day.
Mm,
And so a combination of hydration and food and glucose, I'm sure.
right.
However, it is also after I take my melatonin and well, and
Mm,
trazodone too. But
yep.
so kind of a 1-2 punch of things. But my forearm veins are fucking sick at bedtime. And I like whatever is causing this to happen. I wish I could access this more frequently during the day, you know?
Right. Right. Right.
But
Because
and
you're like,
like
I look sick.
well, and specifically like in my, especially in my last couple of months, for needles and IV access, right? When you're in
Mhm.
a dehydrated stress state, not a lot of sleep, empty food, like no food or drink after midnight, and then you go to get blood work and an IV, like my veins are gone,
Yep.
right? And
Same.
so I have decent veins when they're pumping, but when they're not
Mhm.
pumping, they're fucking disappear,
Yeah, that's the same for me. Mhm.
right? And so how can I, in my world, that's an important thing for me. Is
Yeah.
how can I get my veins to be less hidden when I fucking need them not to be?
Yes,
Um,
yes.
So, anyways, but that's in going down the niacin rabbit hole to tie it back in. All of this kind of builds into how do I get bigger, better veins so I don't have as many needle misses and bruises because I'm also on blood thinners, right? So
Right.
it's just like, fuck. Every
Yeah.
miss is like, well, it's been a week now. My hand's getting pretty much back to normal, but
Big bruise.
yeah, I just and lift, right? Because it's I
Yeah.
love to lift weights.
Yeah.
Turns out when you're gripping a heavy dumbbell or like it affects my grip strength. And then it's like an
Right.
annoying tick in my mind that I just feel it in my hand, like fuck, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
But that's been like a lifelong goal is to have like bodybuilder style veins. Um, so that I can fucking use them at the hospital.
100%. It's functional, right? Not just aesthetic.
Yeah. Well, and then also I think it looks great, but like
Yeah.
that's kind of that 1-2 punch of the why, right?
Yep. Yep.
Hmm. Anyway, this is completely off of I didn't have any of this planned. So that's great.
Take it wherever, dude. It's all good.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for sitting down to have a conversation in the first place. Uh
Yeah.
it's yeah, you're someone I don't know anything about, and yet there's a lot that I'd like to know.
Cool, man.
So
Same. I mean, same to you. And also thank you for inviting me on. I really appreciate it.
it's well, we'll get going.
Okay, cool.
How do you describe yourself to a room full of people who don't know you?
Good question. And I know a lot of people like to talk about themselves.
Mhm.
So I probably do, even though in my head I'm like, no, I don't. But that's a good question because also I recognize that inherently I would jump to my job, which a lot of people do.
Mhm.
So, and that's important because my job is a big part of what I do and what I enjoy and what I derive fulfillment from. But I guess to leave that out and answer it a little bit more unconventionally. I already kind of mentioned this earlier, but if I was going to describe myself, um, I'm I'm probably on the extroverted side. I'm a little bit more friendly, more social. I don't really like being by myself. Um, in general, I like social. Uh, I like social settings. I like social settings. I like group settings. I love conversations like this. I'm inherently seem to bias towards a more like anxious state,
Mhm.
which is something that like I've learned to kind of manage over time instead of looking at it as that's just my personality, and it probably is,
Mhm.
but and that's okay. But that's something that I've kind of probably just matured with and learned to like manage a lot better over time. But that kind of leads to things like obsessiveness, neuroticism. I know people say overthinking. That's kind of just like a non-clinical term to describe that, I guess, right? But
Right.
stuff like that, racing mind, things like that. That's probably, and that actually ties in probably with my discomfort with being alone because I don't have the distraction.
Right.
That's a big part about, kind of describing myself. I was born in a small town, Ontario, Canada. So that's
Same.
anyone that's, yeah, okay. So where were you born?
Teeswater.
Where is that? I know the name.
It's closer to Lake Huron. It's like Wingham, Walkerton, or
Yeah,
kind of. Do you
okay.
remember the E. coli thing back in the
Yeah.
day? So
Yep.
I went to high school in Walkerton.
Okay, gotcha.
Yep. Where?
We
What about
I
you?
so well, I grew up in Erin, so near Orangeville.
Yeah. Okay.
And actually I know that area well because I this will kind of tie in with a little bit more about me too, is I grew up being homeschooled. Oldest of
Oh,
five kids, homeschooled. All my siblings were as well. And part of that meant I wasn't busy during the day. I had schoolwork to do, but it was very unconventional. And so I hung out with my aunts and multiple aunts and a lot of my cousins that were also homeschooled. So that meant we would do beach trips. So we hung out in Southampton a lot.
right.
So we
Yep.
drive we drive right through you guys pretty
Up by
much.
the river.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that was a lot of my childhood.
There's a good catfish fishing in the river up there. There used to be.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. So Aaron, I don't know that I know Aaron very much. Well, actually, so going back to that,
yep.
one of the things that came to mind when you mentioned about not really like being alone.
Hmm.
How have you found co-regulation plays into that? Like in terms of having a partner and your wife now versus like how big of a role does co-regulation play in that equation, do you think?
Like kind of managing that along with a partner kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, just as a lot of the times energetically, I find some people can cause that kind of constrictive state and change like you're more on edge. And other people, you
Hmm.
just let it go and relax. And it's kind of this flow state happens. And so, generally speaking, at least in my experience, more healthy partners, anyways,
Hmm.
uh, that's more the state that I tend towards to go to this co regulation of like, I'm good. Everything feels in flow.
Right, right.
But then in turn, I feel good, right? It's like, oh, this is nice.
Yep, yep, and
So
it's tough to measure that, eh? Tough to quantify that.
absolutely. Well, I would
Yeah.
probably say almost impossible, really, like
Yep,
objectively.
yep,
Yeah.
yep. You can just describe it, and that's all you can do, right?
Yeah.
Intuition, the importance of intuition, I think.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah, the so my wife, she's a competitive bodybuilder. She's about under 5 weeks out now from
Yeah.
going for the pro
Awesome.
card at Toronto. So she's in she'll actually probably be coming home. Oh, she's home right now. So Chihuahuas might bark for a hot second, but
Sure.
um, but but yeah, we've kind of like fallen into a routine that works pretty damn well for us. It works well for our goals, and I think it does work well for our personalities too. She does a good job, especially more recently, of being aware of kind of like my personality differences in regards to what I need. So a good example of that would be like if you right now she's on prep, so she does a great job of just everything's no, and she just has every day is the same, right? They just
Hmm.
blend into the other days. Um, because of that, and I've done a good job of kind of accepting that and being like, okay, this is a good opportunity for me to just spend time growing myself, growing my business, and kind of just getting dialed in and whatever goals I want at the same time. Um, but that can create an environment where we are they're good. That can create an environment where, at least for me, there can be some like unmeasurable tension
Yep.
that is tough to kind of identify, but it's there. And it probably has to do with, I think, and this is something that like my wife Sam's really good at recognizing is she may not require as much, social time with friends as I do. And I think it's important for everyone, but there's probably a spectrum there. And I
Mhm.
think I probably just do better with more, and she may just require less than I do to kind of fill her cup. So she's done a good job, I think, recognizing those states where it's like, yeah, if you're feeling spread thin and you're feeling those uncomfortable, edgy, anxious, irritable type feelings, you probably just need to go hang out with some of your friends.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
and it's a good reminder for me because I'm like, yeah, yeah, that's exactly what I need.
Yeah. It's well, in that outside perspective of like, you know me very well.
Yeah.
Please just tell me what you think I might need right now because
Yeah.
so often we're so far up our own ass where it's just hard to tell. Like, I don't know. I know I need something, but there's like
Yeah.
all these options, and how do I pick which one?
Yeah.
Whereas for her, it's like this is the one. Like, yeah, you're right.
The objectivity, or even if it's not objective but just an outside perspective, is
Yeah.
like is helpful because I like to think I'm like reasonably self-aware, but even in those
Mhm.
moments it's like you're already in a heightened state, so decision making is already compromised. So if
Exactly.
you can have someone else that's like, oh, I feel fine based on what you're telling me, here's what I think you need, and then you're like, okay,
Mm.
cool, I can lean on that.
Which is ultimately, it's very much like a coach, right? It's
Yeah.
I don't want to make this decision. Please do all these things for me, and I'll just follow the plan,
Yeah.
which I'm very sure Sam is great at, right? She's
Right.
so even better. It's
But you know
win-win.
what? You know what the other parallel is there too with coaching is that it's still for that to go well and actually be productive, it still relies on me, and the parallel to coaching would be the client
Yes.
communicating like what they're actually experiencing. If you don't do that, then it's like nothing gets fixed. There's no solution possible.
Mhm. Well, and
So,
I think that's any relationship with anybody, which is
mhm,
like a universal truth, really. Like,
yep.
if we don't communicate our internal reality to somebody else, they will never know what that is.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And that's hard for a lot of people. I will say like I'm pretty good at that.
Mhm.
And it is definitely easier when you're, going back to like how different partners can affect that. When you're in a
Yeah,
relationship where you feel like you're in a safe place and they do understand you, you're more likely to share that. But my I already want to share those things, but
sure.
if I didn't feel like I was in a place with some in a relationship with someone that would, I don't know, respond appropriately or in a way that
Yeah.
felt like it was safe to me, I probably would be less likely to do so.
Well, fear of judgment is the thing that comes to mind. It's like, why would you share things that are less comfortable to talk about when there's more room for vulnerability? When it's
Mhm.
like, this is the higher risk situation. And it's just more objectively speaking, I don't want to take that risk on right now. And so I won't.
Well, especially and that's a reasonable decision process to go through when you're already in an uncomfortable state. You're like, I don't want to feel worse.
Yeah.
So if in your head you're like, I share something and someone makes me feel bad, I should just keep it to myself.
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah. Well, and it's funny though, because when you continue down that path, and this is something I talked to Jordan about, um, sometimes we would be better off in a worse situation, right? So choosing just that little bit more discomfort can help us be more motivated to significantly improve our version of reality.
Yep.
We're like,
Yep.
when we hit this rock bottom state, now it's time to fucking make a change. And that's, I mean, to tie it right into coaching again as well. Like, those are the people that a lot of times reach out and be like, actually, I need somebody to help me in my corner. And
Yep.
whether that's friendship or partnership or whatever, um, you have to be able to trust that person. And
Oh,
that's, it's
100%.
no like and trust. It's sales. Everything
Yeah.
is sales,
It
right?
is. It is. It
Yeah.
totally is.
Yeah. But if you don't have those things, you're not going to feel safe. And so you're never going to share those things. And thus, in my mind, you will always be longing for a sense of deeper connection. And that's me speaking to myself. Right? It's like,
Yep.
without starting with, and here's the other thing, nobody wants to go first, is one of the things that I say to myself all the time. And so I'll just go first. And that
Right.
holds true across a lot of things. And that's, nobody wants to be uncomfortable. Like, well, I'll take the risk and try it myself. And if it's not received well, I have the confidence that I can, that's not going to be a devastating blow, you know,
Yeah. That's hard to
rejection or
do.
judgment. It's, yeah, I do.
Yep.
It's, I think that my health has really given me great perspective on that, in the
Okay.
sense of like, when you're almost dead, somebody judging you doesn't make any difference.
Right. Right.
Right. And so it's like,
Right.
I have memorable states where most things wouldn't have made any difference, right?
Right.
And that's one example is like my an apartment burning down or something. When I was in the hospital one time, a family member's house burned down, and I was just like, I just don't care. Like,
Right.
I
Right.
hope they're okay.
Yes. Right.
But
Right.
I'm literally like on air and all fucked up, right? And it's like,
Yep.
that sucks.
Yeah. Because it's like
And
anything less than death seems like such a non-issue, right?
and it's not even, yeah, and death of
Yeah.
someone else, even it's like, I don't know. I'm just more worried about me.
Right.
Like,
That's
yeah,
fair. Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
and selfish or not, but it's like at the end of the day, I'm no good to anybody if I'm dead.
Right.
So
Yeah.
let's
And
focus
we're
on
all wired with self-preservation
absolutely,
reactions anyway. So it is what it
absolutely.
is, right? Yeah. Yeah.
But in any case, that's the being more tend or towards an extroverted person. Um, yeah, I think it's very hard to imagine, or for me to imagine what it's like to be an introvert in
Hmm.
terms of much like you, it sounds like I very much enjoy conversations. I very much enjoy meeting people. And
Yep.
then the light bulb moments with people when they have realizations, or even in the gym, right? It's like,
Yep.
I didn't know I could do that. And then they are now a different person. They're more confident, they're more
Yep.
energetic, they're more lively for the rest
Yep.
of the time, like day, week, year.
Hmm.
It's like I played some small role in that. And it's just like, that's fucking awesome.
That's the fulfilling part about coaching. That's the thing. What you just said.
Right.
That's the
But
that's the that's the dragon we're all chasing.
absolutely.
Yeah.
It's the trickle effect. It's the meta effect, whatever you want to call it, right? I don't
Yep.
know what the term is,
Yep.
but the potential for change in the world. And that's why I don't like getting into politics and stuff too much, because I don't feel like I have the power to make much change.
Right.
Right. But what I
Right.
do find, objectively speaking, is I have definitely made an impact on multiple people's lives
Hmm.
indefinitely, and that's
Yep.
true with everybody.
Yep.
So, and definitely good and bad. Don't get me wrong. I've definitely
Sure.
left some negative impacts as well.
Sure.
But that's the lessons in life, right? So,
Oh yeah. Yeah. 100%.
could you talk a bit about the path that's kind of led you to where you are today? I know you said, like, obviously you do
Hmm.
coaching,
Hmm.
but how did you get to, this place?
Sure. So when I was kind of describing myself, I guess that
Hmm.
probably kind of takes me a little bit because I mentioned I was homeschooled. So that probably takes me a bit, or that kind of takes me actually to when I actually went to school. So I can kind of give you the big milestones that got me to
Yeah,
here, which is uh so yeah, homeschooled, small town, Ontario, Canada, and then grade 10, 15 is when I went up to my parents and I was like, I want to go to school. And they were like, okay. So went to school. I lived the house I grew up in was right across from the high school. And uh pretty much all my friends, like I had friends in sports that was in another town. So I had a lot of friends in another town. I went to church, so I had friends in that town, which was that was in a different town. And then the friends I had in town were my best friend was a year younger than me. So all my friends in town were a year younger than me. So when I went to school, it was like I knew a lot of people anyway. I just didn't know anyone my age really. I just knew everyone in grade 9.
grade 9. Yeah,
So yeah, so I went, met a ton of new people, crazy definitely like culture shock for sure,
sure.
because I'd only seen classrooms in movies, which is kind of crazy to think of, right?
Yeah, right.
And so yeah, went to high school. That was a crazy experience, and then ended up staying for 4 years. So I did an extra year after grade 12, and then I think I had a year off or year and a half, and then I ended up going to college at Humber College in Toronto, and I went for fitness and health because I got into fitness through sports. So I played sports all through high school, and that's where I got like really into training. Like I just love to exercise, which is how
Yeah.
probably a lot of people got into like coaching, right? It's like, yeah, I literally just love the gym. I love exercising. And that was it for me, where it's like I just love training. And I got into that and then was like, okay, I think being a personal trainer it's kind of up my alley. So like I'm gonna pursue that. And I know I don't need to go to college for that, but I feel like that could be a good experience. It's college, not very expensive. It's 2 years. So let's do
Mhm.
that. Went to college, but there's only part of me that was thinking about my future. The rest was all about partying. And I still had a lot of like unmanaged mental health stuff and social image things. So that completely derailed. And I partied really hard and ended up leaving. Yeah, I think with 1 semester to go. So I stayed for a year and a half,
Mhm.
with a lot of good memories, but like largely that was like a big skid mark on my memories for the most part. So
Yeah.
a lot of bad memories there. So left and then uh struggled with some bedridden depression where I couldn't get out of bed for a while, couldn't get to work, couldn't do anything.
Mm.
And then I don't remember how long that lasted. I struggled with that for a while, but as far as getting out of bed, I managed to get to um girlfriend at the time, her grandfather ran a successful business reupholstering dental equipment, selling dental equipment.
Mm.
So I ended up working for him and doing odd jobs, and then ended up kind of actually just working in the business at one point. So I worked there for a few years, and that kind of got me into the next step. And then I went tree planting, Northern Ontario.
Yeah.
So the if you're familiar with that, that's all
Yeah.
piecework. So you get paid per tree.
Uh-huh.
So I did that for 2 seasons. This brings us to 2015, 2016. And that was when I still remember, actually, I have some clarity around then where how I felt. 'Cause I remembered feeling like I was on a precipice of like a lot of mental health stuff and lingering addiction things. And
Mm.
then was like, I I can kind of see myself leaving this. You know what I mean? If that makes sense.
There's
Cause
an
I
exit
was
or light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak.
yeah, I had like one foot in one life, one foot in the other kind of. Cause and then because throughout all that, I had a lot of like drug abuse issues, alcoholism, all that stuff. And I couldn't really kick that, but I also didn't really try that hard. Like I wasn't trying to kick it.
Yeah.
There was like rehab talks. I had drug counselor, all that stuff. But then there was a point where for me, the transition was like probably unconventional for a lot of people that struggle with those things is because I actually got to a point where I would at the end of like the addiction where it was like daily, when I was on my way out of it, it was like I was able to create some parameters and regain some control where it's like, okay, I'm just going to do drugs and drink on the weekends.
Mhm.
So it started with that. And then it started being like, I'm gonna drink and do drugs, but it'll be on the Friday and I'll take it easy on the Saturday. So because I don't want to feel like crap on Sunday. And
Mhm.
then it was like, okay, well, I want to train, so I don't want to ruin my workouts. So I'll just drink on Saturday, just once a week. And then before I knew it, it was like it just didn't support my goals anymore. And then I got a job selling supplements at Popeye
Yep.
supplement store here, right? And then so I did that. This is
The
after tree
Popeyes
planting.
bucks.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
Popeye's
man.
Bucks. Yeah. I think it's all digital now too. I don't even think they do the Bucks, right?
I haven't been into Popeyes in a long time, but I remember the paper money,
Yeah.
like, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's all gone digital now. But yeah, so I worked there and that was really good because that was where I started to kind of use my inherent intrigue or curiosity for like health and supplements because I would just spend time just learning about all that stuff.
Mhm.
And where I probably got some like kind of forced experience in regards to like retail and sales because every other job would have been just general laboring stuff. A lot of my work had been in like different tree businesses, funny enough.
Mhm.
Um, and then just landscaping stuff like that. So that was my first kind of like retail experience and like face to face B2C sales stuff. So that was helpful in that regard. Did that for a few years, and then I ended up I was working full time, but then I ended up having an opportunity where my mom's trainer that she was working with, she's older and doing in-home training. She had talked to my mom and was like, "I'm looking to retire. I know you mentioned Tim wants to get into personal training again, not again, but restart that process of
Yeah,
getting
right.
into it for the first time." And she was like, "I think he could be a good fit to take over my client." And I was like, "Oh, that'd be pretty cool." Because at that point, I was training at Good Life, and I was like, I had friends that were training at Good Life, like trainers at Good Life, and they were all
Yes.
saying like, "Come work, come work, come work." And I had my kind of philosophical differences with Good Life and
Good
stuff.
life.
So
Yeah,
yeah, and but I got to a point where I recognized that this could be a really helpful stepping stone professionally.
absolutely.
So I think this seems like a good way to do it. But I knew from then that I wanted to run my own business. So I was prepared to do that. And then I had this opportunity pop up. So I met with this woman end of 2016, and she ended up, I only ended up working with two different couples because she trained couples in their homes. So I trained two
Mm.
different couples. One of them stayed on. They did a lot of traveling. So they stayed on for a good 3, 4 years after that, on and off. but I trained them, and that was a really good experience. So I still remember like driving home and getting that check for $650.
Sure.
And I was like, I can't believe like I made my own money. Like
Uh-huh.
I'm giving them something and they're giving me real money. I'm like, this is the coolest thing ever. Yeah, so that was pretty cool. And that was only like 10-minute drive from my
Oh,
parents where I was living at the time. So it was
yeah.
awesome. And so that fired me up. And then from there I realized, a lot of free time on my hands. I did Popeyes on the weekends, and then I was trying to find in-home clients, right?
Clients.
Middle
Yeah.
throughout the week. And I was like, I don't really know, zero business skills too. So it's like I don't really know how to get clients, and so I had an opportunity where I for a little while there where I had a friend that was he was doing some in-homes with some people in Toronto,
Mhm.
but he was doing his master's in London at Western. So he was like, "Hey, do you want to, while I'm in school, do you want to train my clients for me?" So I was going into Toronto twice a week to train a handful of clients, which was super helpful. More experience, obviously, and probably not worth it monetarily, but worth it from the experience
Yeah.
perspective for sure. So that was really, really helpful. But then it got to the point where I had people reaching out being like, "I want you to coach me, but
Mm.
I don't have a gym in my home." And I'm like, man, this makes so much more sense if I just had a gym where people came to me. And that was when my mom actually mentioned this, where she was like, uh, my dad has a doctor's office. He's an optometrist, and he bought and built a building, or bought a property, built a building in like 2002, 2003, something like that,
Mhm.
in the town where I grew up. And there's a couple units underneath in the basement, and the one is around 1,000 square feet, and it was empty at the time. There'd been medical offices actually down there before. There was a chiropractor there before, but it was vacant. And my mom was like, "Hey, the unit underneath the office is open. You should go check it out." And I was like, "Yeah, that could totally work." So then I went down and I was like, "This is perfect." So
Done.
yeah, so I say actually where they used to have the waiting room is where I set it up. It was like I had squat stands, chin up bar, Olympic rings, some dumbbells, some kettlebells, iPad for the music, plug
Yep.
into my brother's guitar amp that he wasn't
Yeah,
using
yeah.
for the speaker. And then yeah, barbell and some bumper plates. It was pretty awesome. So I started doing that, and then picking up clients slowly but surely. And then that's my in-person studio that I have now called Motor Strength Health Club. So
Mm.
private training, all one-on-one, one-on-two stuff. And we now have coaches there. So today I don't actually have any in-persons. Wednesdays I take off fully. So I have coaches there right now coaching people. And then uh, I was able to, in the last 2 years, where I was working full time there, obviously, like mornings and evenings, the normal trainer schedule.
Yeah.
But it was in the last like couple years where I dropped it down to just mornings. So I'll train Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and some Saturday mornings for some kind of overflow.
Yeah.
But at least 4 days a week, I'll just train the mornings, which is really, really nice in person. So I still have that. And then I have my online coaching company where obviously I can work with anybody. And that's
Yeah.
largely like a nutrition fat loss based company.
Yeah. Have you so in terms of your own fat loss in your journey, is
Mhm.
there what does that look like for you?
Good question. So like the overview is like I've always been lean, small, skinny.
Okay.
Like when I played sports, I mostly played rugby and football, and I just wanted to be super jacked, but never was.
Sure.
Just lean.
Yep.
I was 145, 150 pounds in grade like graduating high school.
Right.
So
Wow.
yeah, 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 it was pretty small. um but yeah, so I was pretty small the whole time, always trying to get jacked. So I got really
Mm.
into powerlifting, and like I trained like a actually I initially started training like a CrossFitter, and then got into like bodybuilding, and
Sure.
then got into powerlifting when I found starting strength.
Mhm.
And that would have been like 2016-ish, something like that. While I was
Right.
at Popeyes, I think I came across that. So started getting into that stuff. Still did a bunch of like Olympic lifting stuff because I was really interested in that as well. So some starting strength stuff, got into the barbell lifts, and then I didn't really end up pushing weight, like my own body weight, because I guess I just didn't really understand how, and I didn't look
Mhm.
at it like a frustration. I kind of just enjoyed training and didn't really think too much of it. I'm
Yeah.
like, I don't know, I'm a lean guy, like I look fit, whatever. But not thinking like, oh, you could be 185 pounds. You just need to
Mhm.
do the things to get there. So looking back, of course, I just didn't understand what it took, which is all the people that hire me, right? They're hire
Yeah.
you. So same thing.
Yeah.
But that was me for the longest time. And then meeting my wife was very helpful because she understood that stuff a lot better. And she was
Sure.
able to kind of give me that objective perspective of like, here's what you're gonna have to do um, if you want to see this happen. I'm like, huh, okay. And
Yeah.
so I ended up committing to my first real bulk. I was heavier, a little bit heavier, but unhealthy when I was partying in college. So other
Sure.
than that, that would have been the only time I was like a little bit heavier. But other than that, I've been always like small, lean, and skinny. And then I actually committed to a really good bulk from like 2020, end of 2021 maybe, till November, I guess, of last year, 2023.
Yep.
So, and I knew that at that point I was like, this is the long game. Like if I want to gain weight, I can't hang out in an 8 week surplus. I gotta just
Yeah.
commit to this. So um I did that and then got to the point where I was like actually struggling with some mental health stuff again. And I was like, you
Hmm.
know what I think could really help is dieting right now. So
Hmm.
I ended up losing almost 30 pounds, around 28 pounds from like November to I think I stopped at March sometime.
Hmm.
Um, and then felt great. And I've been kind of hanging out now around 190. So
It's a different like, and I guess I don't, not to correct, but you said, you've been skinny and small, and I think in my mind it's just the other end of the spectrum. I was,
mhm,
210 in grade 9, never
yep,
exercised a day in my life because I had all these health things and a central line on my chest and all this stuff.
yep,
So I came in from being like a heavier kid with no sports or anything. I'm
yep,
just like, I don't I don't even remember my thought process, but I remember seeing some bodybuilding magazines in the grocery store I worked at, right? And then I knew my aunt had an old York machine in the basement that I didn't know anything about. But I
yep,
thought, I think that muscles are connected to that thing. So, maybe I'll just go use that.
yep,
But like, it's mentally, and I'm guessing for yourself as well, once you get to that place of like, your body, your confidence is low, and like your how you navigate the world is different when you're not in a place of feeling good about who you are. And I think that goes mentally as well, but specifically physically, which is, I guess, largely my view on the gym. Most people or everyone probably in the gym, I view them there as through some lens of control. There's some
mhm,
aspect in their life going into chaos or some shit that they can't change and they want something to attach to.
yep,
Gym, and that was for me 100%. A lot of health things, a lot of life happening. If I don't go to the gym, that's on me. If I get
yep,
results, that's also on me. But
yep,
then that rolled into confidence in the world and how you sort of stand and your personality and your neurons, right? All these
yep.
things start to change. And then the person that you are is down different,
Oh,
right? And
dude,
that's,
100%. I was reminded of that when I went through this diet phase
well,
again.
that's what I'm thinking of, right?
Yeah,
You're like,
yeah,
as you're saying, your mental health started to change. It's like, absolutely it would. It's
yep,
how, yeah, who
yep,
you are is just now different.
yep, yep,
Yeah.
yep.
Not
It was a
better or
good
worse, but
just different, 100%. And it was good because it did remind me of, and this is kind of actually informed like some of my messaging online a little bit more now too, because I'm like, oh man, this is something I should be hitting on more. And the fact that I experienced it again was helpful because
mhm,
being like a fitness guy, you know what I mean? It's like I never missed the gym while I was bulking.
no.
So that's not a problem for me. But if I draw some parallel to relate to the people I work with, it's like I was in a place where I was like, oh, I'm over fat. Like this is I'm too fat. I don't like how I look. I don't like how I feel. And it's affecting literally everything.
Mhm,
So and it's tough to identify sometimes when you're in it, but then once I was able to start dieting and see some changes and then feel the changes, I was like, oh, this feels way better. Like work is better, hanging out with my parents is better, hanging out with my wife is better,
mhm,
sleeping is better, everything is better that I do on my day to day.
mhm.
Eating is better. You know, I was at a point where I wasn't enjoying food, and I was like, man, like I like looking forward to some of my meals, you know? And I was like,
Yeah,
so there's some weird stuff happening there too, which kind of just like pulls you into some low grade kind of depressive states. And I'm
yeah,
pretty self aware when that's happening. And that's why I think I was able to be like, oh man, a lot of people I think probably live there for decades if they're not really
mhm,
aware of that stuff or they try and ignore it. But like I couldn't really ignore it. And yeah, having that like perspective after once I got to a place where I was like, oh man, like this is the most jacked I've looked at this level of body fat percentage. That's pretty cool, you know?
Yeah.
And I
Well, and
feel
there's a
better
shift
about
from
everything.
powerless to powerful is what comes to
Right.
mind, right? That's the state of change in the day to day.
Yep.
Yeah. For a lot of
Yep.
people, I think, like, because I don't, one, there are ways to do it, but I don't know how.
Mhm.
Great.
Mhm.
We can help you.
Well, that's the best thing too is like fitness is going to look different for everyone and obviously not
Hmm.
everyone's as able-bodied as other people,
Yeah.
but there's something you can do. And one of the most empowering like messages is when you or maybe not messages, but empowering like concepts once it lands for someone is like, "Oh, this is accessible to me. Like
Hmm.
I can do something about this. I'm not actually stuck because that's probably a feeling that a lot of people have. And a lot of people before they come to you, before they come to me, it's like that can be a feeling people have where they're like, I'm doomed to a certain
Yeah.
life or whatever, or
Yeah.
a certain way of looking, certain way of feeling. It's like, no, you actually have a lot more influence on this than you actually think. And that can be a
Hmm.
really like very like empowering message for people to hear.
It's absolutely it in my mind goes to story work. It's always an association to the story that they're saying to themselves.
Mhm.
And in my perspective, it's generally uh my story is different because the details are different. And that's where if you focus on the details, you will never find someone who has an identical life path.
Mhm.
And so, and that's been my experience for a lot of my life. I was hoping that I would, right? So it's like
Yep.
this is coming from a place of 30 plus years.
Yeah.
But you spend a long time in that space just thinking someday maybe, or there is literally no one. And so then you stop looking, but then you also stop looking for where are the commonalities and
Right.
the underlying experience of nobody understands this because my story is different. That feeling is the same for most people.
Yes.
Right. And so connecting to that other layer of the details are just the bullshit. It's the thinking. That's the
Yep.
world. Right. But it's
Yep.
the experience of the world and how we, you know, interact with it. That's very similar. And that's where to bring it back to the start, the connection, that deeper sense of connection that we're all looking for.
Mhm.
Um, when you can identify those things and you can say, hey, this works for you too even though your story is different than mine, then it's like, boom, right? Like,
Yep.
fuck yeah, let's go.
Yep.
Goosebumps, right? It's like, that's
Yeah.
the change. That's the
Yep.
thing. Yeah,
Yep.
man.
100%, totally agree. It's like you're the everyone kinda has a different path, but the commonality is the different paths,
Absolutely. You're right.
you know? Yeah.
Where is it feels like a song. One of those things is not like the other, but like the
Yeah.
other version of that, right? It's like,
Yes.
right. And yet they're all the same.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're unique just like everybody else.
Right. Right. That's right. And at the same time, no one is special.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
To kind of shift down to that, uh, hard left turn.
Yep.
How would you describe your relationship with death?
So, I have an interesting one that is very probably naive
Mm.
and largely pre-jaded, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Very gentle because both my parents are the youngest of large-ish families. And so that means like I my mom's dad died when I was very, very young. Her mom had already passed when she was like around my age now in her 30s, or maybe even earlier. Um, she was the youngest of 7, my dad was the youngest of 4. Um, and then my dad's dad, he passed a long time, so I never met him. And then my dad's mom was my only grandparent that I knew kind of throughout my childhood and in high school.
Mhm.
And she didn't live near us either. So like we knew her, we had a relationship with her, but it wasn't I don't know, when she passed, kind of hard to describe, but I wasn't sad that she died. I was kind of sad for my dad.
Absolutely.
You
Yeah.
know, that's like
Yeah.
I was like, "Oh, man, he lost his mom." Like,
Yeah.
that's horrible. So, but I didn't yeah, does that kinda make sense?
It
So,
does. You didn't
yeah,
have a direct relationship. And so you can see
yeah,
that it's probably difficult for him, but
yeah, and
it's
I
just
knew
not difficult
her,
for you.
you know,
Yeah.
I exactly, and, like, I knew
Yeah.
her because, and I loved her. She would visit us a few times a year. She lived in Calgary, in Alberta, and we lived obviously in Ontario. So saw her maybe a couple times a year, something like that, and it was awesome. It was great, but that was probably like as far as family goes. That and then some older aunts and uncles when I was younger passed, but even then I was younger and not as close with them as my parents, so not having that same connection.
Mhm.
None of it was particularly heavy, for lack of a better way to describe it. And with another important aspect that I brought up before that I think shapes people's perspective with death is we also didn't have a family pet growing.
Yeah.
So I never went through a pet dying. Um, so and that's kind of honestly my experience with death.
Hmm.
Interestingly enough, though, probably like kind of tying it in with when I was kind of describing my psyche and my personality, even though I haven't had those experiences, I dwell on them all the
Yeah.
time.
In
So
in what way?
yeah, just your typical um maybe it's not typical. I shouldn't say that. Typical for me. Typical for me. I'm projecting on everybody else. But like the I guess just the confusion of the unknown, right? And then
Mm,
which has ultimately kind of led me to my faith. But like but that's still the questions that a lot of people have of just like what actually happens and then what happens after? What happens
mm,
during even? What is that process when you know it's going to happen? Little things like that.
sure.
Um so largely I guess a fear of the unknown. But but yeah, so that's kind of I guess that kind of describes it a little bit for you. It's
Yeah.
interesting in that sense because I don't have firsthand experience of like someone dying in my life and
Mhm.
then a shift afterwards. Like I haven't had that.
So it's not something you would describe as like a fear or even for anxiety. I don't know. This is where one of the reasons I find this is an interesting question is
Hmm.
because I think that I have an odd relationship with
Hmm.
the experience compared to
Yep.
most people.
Hmm.
And so I don't know what it's like for other people. Like I don't really spend time thinking about it or worrying about it,
Yep.
even though I probably have a lot of reasons why I maybe could or should. Right. It's
Hmm.
like, it's just a waste of energy though. Right. It's like, I don't know.
Right.
When it comes, it comes. And when it does, there's not a goddamn thing you can do about it. Let me tell you that much.
Right.
So you're just you're not at the wheel.
Yeah.
So
Well, and that's an empowering message too, actually, right? When you realize when you're actually able to relinquish the control you never had.
yeah.
Yeah, that's like a big one. And that's kind of the meta question that I've got to after that, kind of going through those processes and those that kind of thinking where I inevitably get to that place of from a logical perspective, it makes zero sense to consume my mind with this.
Hmm.
And then that also that I have that logical perspective, and then I have the spiritual perspective of, well, I know what's going to happen to me, and the struggle that I have with it is proof that I I need to be faithful. I need to lean
Mm,
on God for this. That's why, like, if I didn't have that struggle, then I probably wouldn't be pointed to God. It's almost like that's a blessing that I struggle with it because then it's like anytime
sure.
that comes up, that's a trigger to be like, I'm just not I'm not showing faith. Like
Mm,
you know what I mean? I need to relinquish control, not just in general, but I need to relinquish control directly to God because
mm.
he knows what's gonna happen and I'll be okay.
I guess my question that comes to mind is like, well, what's the difference? What happens? And I
Right.
don't, yeah. But I guess
Right.
so that's my question for you is what is the difference in your, I don't know, thinking or
It
in your faith?
difference in regards to what?
Like what happens next?
Well, I guess from my belief system, like believing, in a Christian God, that
Hmm.
I believe that, I will go to heaven
Sure.
and I'll spend eternity there. And that place will not have, you know, the grieving and the sorrow and the sadness and the struggles that earthly life brings us.
Mm,
Um, so I guess, and it's funny too, right? Because that brings us another host of problems that humans will do, um,
yeah.
myself included, which is living forever. Man, that doesn't sound like something I want to do either,
No.
though.
Right.
Right?
Well, and where I go with that is like a lot of life's best memories or aspects and feelings are associated during and after struggle.
Yes. Right.
And so and this is I'm not a man of faith. I'm not against it. I just am kind of
Yep.
like it doesn't seem like the thing for me, largely
Right.
because like I do believe heaven is a place on earth and you can
Yeah.
access that at any time. Because
Yeah.
I also believe a lot of people live a lot of their life in hell, right?
Yeah.
It's this constant state of anxiety or fear and
Yep.
stress and, you know, disempowerment. I can't do this and my circumstances, I can't change them, blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
It's like all of that can be true. And if you can't find beauty in the world, then I it's a tricky cycle to get out of. Right. It's
Oh,
like if you
100%.
can't look out at the trees and the sky and think, holy fuck, this is crazy.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
that's like immediate humbling.
Yep.
Um, I don't know. And so that's where and that's faith is very intriguing to me. And largely why I talked to Stu about faith specifically. It's like I've never found a good answer is well, why would I be like my version of God is it's everything and nothing at the same time. Right. That
Sure.
is
Yep.
God is everything. It's the masculine, the feminine, the energy,
Sure.
and like we are just all part of that.
Right.
But then, so
Right.
then when you die, you just return to where you already are. Like, well, what
Sure.
does that mean? I don't know. My mind is just a peon man
Yeah.
walking around on Earth. What
Right.
do I know? Like,
Yeah.
it's not for me to know right now.
Well, I think also like what the way you describe that kind of reminds me as well that I think sometimes for people who do subscribe to a faith,
Yeah,
it can almost appear whether they do this on purpose or not, or if someone's just who's listening is projecting their own kind of thoughts, regardless,
sure.
it can be perceived as like you found the answers or figured it out, but I guess I haven't, so I'll figure out my own. But you're still, you know what I mean? It can almost
Mm,
feel like they
a
think they have it
judgment.
all figured out.
Sure.
Maybe a little bit judgment, but even just like even before the judgment, even just like just the fact of like, oh, that guy seems like he has it all figured out, which seems anti humility. Do you know what I
Mm,
mean?
sure.
So, and I actually think like I particularly one of the things I love about Christianity is humility
Hmm.
as part of the faith and that being like a core value.
Sure.
Um, and part of that is actually me also being like, yeah, I have the same brain you do in that regard. Like, you know what I mean? Like, as far as a general human, it's like, I don't know everything and I
Hmm.
can't. So there is a level of acceptance of the unknown that I don't know. And there are questions I can't answer to you or myself. So to
Hmm.
pretend that I could do that would also be silly. Do you know what I mean? So
Absolutely. Yeah.
there's a level of I don't know, that also has to be present, I think,
Mhm.
you
And
know?
like, and accepting, or at least in my view, that we're not meant to know.
Uh-huh.
Like, because you can
Yep.
spend a lot of time, and that's another thing I said it on here before, but why doesn't always matter. Like, what is this
Right.
association with answering the question of why?
Mhm.
Like, what difference does it make? I don't generally prescribe to that, especially in terms of like very important things in my world. You know, it's like there are very few things that really, I don't know, could take that much energy like intentionally, right? Otherwise, it'd be accidental or as a byproduct of slipping into a dysfunctional pattern or thinking or wasting my energy. It's like,
Yep.
no, this is not who I want to be in the world. And that's I could see going into faith for that. Like who do you
Yep.
use as a North Star? What is my guide? It's just
Right.
like I know that I'm not being the best version of me, regardless of what that guide is. And so what does
Yep.
that person look like?
Well, and you know what? For me, anyway, because that is like that's like I think kind of the big question too. And for me, it was like everyone could probably benefit from a North Star, whatever
Hmm,
that is, right? If it's the god,
absolutely.
if it's their golden retriever, their god, their dad, their mom, whatever, their partner. Um, but I don't think that's where the value in religion comes from or living in a place of faith. I think, at least for me, the value comes from giving me, and I guess actually this would be describing North Star, but not in the cultural sense, but more so specifically a reference point for like how do I know? And this comes back to actually the humility perspective, in my opinion, is
Mhm.
like, how do I know what's right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. Like, I can tell you what I feel is right. Like, I feel like it's okay to not murder,
Yeah. The
but like,
intuition part of it.
why do I feel like that's okay? Because other people feel like that's okay. So like,
Mhm.
why am I right and they're wrong? So it almost was like for me, the one of the helps that I found is like subscribing to a way of a moral code that does give me a sense of reference point so that
Mhm,
I'm not, I do, and that probably aligns with me as a person as well, I'll admit, which is like I do value like principled living and
mhm.
being consistent. Um, and that, I mean, people of faith as well as people not can be prone to that. Probably all of us are because we're all emotional beings.
Of course, yeah.
But that's one value I found in regards to like anyone I think that subscribes to any faith is it does provide a reference point of like
Mhm.
you can filter through, okay, I feel like this is okay, but like if I just go by my feelings, I could be wrong here,
Well,
you know?
honestly, my mind goes back to the coaching thing again. It's
Mhm.
essentially it's a version of a coach. You're
Yeah.
offloading a decision-making process to know whether this is a yes or a no,
Right. Right.
right? It's like, is this allowed or is this something that a good person, according to my definition, and then also this other definition
Right.
that's been in text through time,
Yep.
um, approves, right? And if the answer is yes, then like, yeah, that's great. And it goes according to my mental and moral code.
Right.
But
Right. Yeah,
yeah,
and then obviously there's obvious problems with that too, right? Because I think people would be like, well, you know, um, I don't think blind faith is particularly healthy either,
right.
right? I think I believe that like God's given all of us intuition for a reason as well. So
Mhm.
that makes this even more messy, right? Is
A layer
because
of complexity,
I
absolutely.
yeah, yeah, and I think that's important. So this idea of just like hyper legalism and and outsourcing 100% of your own thinking is beyond silly. Like that doesn't serve anyone well other than someone who's willing to take advantage of that. um
Yeah.
so that could go either way, but I think there has to be a marriage between the two.
Well, yeah, I completely agree. And we're all different enough that there's got to be room for some interpretation, right? Because other like
Yeah.
how we hear the same word or sentence is different next week than it is today, let alone 5 years ago or 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And then the difference between me and you,
Yep.
right? And so to think that if we all read the same text and follow the same guideline, that we're all going to end up with the same conclusions,
Hmm.
it's fucking naive. Like it's just not going to
Right.
happen. Well,
Right.
and hence
Right.
religious wars, right? There's
Yep.
whatever, right? There's
Yep.
I'm right. It's like, first of all, how do you know that? And second of all, like, who are you? Right?
Right.
That's the
Right.
humility piece. Some people would read the Bible and not detect humility there, right? It's like,
Which is
yeah,
it, that's exactly it. Ultimately, you have to come back to that. If
yeah,
there's even like, because I grew up in the church as well, so it's like,
sure.
and there's like any place with humans, you're gonna have conflict, and there's a lot of conflict within every single
Oh,
religion
yeah.
and sect or whatever. And I think one thing I've learned from my parents is ultimately like it has to be filtered through that humility, because if you're coming at it through a lens that doesn't subscribe to what you actually believe, but you're just being a rule follower or whatever, it's like, this is what it says. It's like that probably doesn't actually, it's probably not helpful, first of all, and it may not actually be in line with what you actually believe. So you're
Mhm.
drifting a little bit away from what
Yeah,
you actually say you believe in. You know what I mean?
yeah. Well, and I guess I'm curious in your opinion on this. It feels like a lot of people intentionally disconnect from what they do or don't believe, or these principles, in terms of news cycles, in terms of these last 4 years of global events.
Mhm.
People put a lot of energy and effort into hearing about things that they would otherwise have no idea exists. Like
Yeah.
looking out my window, I would not know what's happening in Orangeville area, let alone in
Yeah.
another country. And
Yeah.
yet people spend a lot of time updating themselves on these events. And I guess it is my opinion that they really don't make a difference to me. I'm not
Right.
going to be able to make any meaningful difference in whatever's happening there because I'm not there and I'm not allocating my time, effort, or money
Mhm.
to them. And
Right.
so
And you no, dude, I
otherwise, it's just
totally
a waste
agree.
of it's a story. I want to feel good about myself, complaining about a thing that's happening elsewhere. Like,
Yeah.
nah, it's
Yeah.
not it,
Yeah.
man. It's not it.
No, and you know what? That's not it. And I don't know if you've gone through that, but I have, and it can be helpful to go through that because then
Yeah.
it forces you to continue that way or to examine yourself and be like, am I happy like this?
Right.
Because then you can change it. And once I started to do that, I realized like, so the way that I describe it is like the alternative to being globally entertained or globally participating, I guess, is like, is I think acting locally is like the thing.
Absolutely.
So it's like, and you kind of touched on that, it basically in a way when you were like, well, I can affect my clients, I can affect my family, I can affect the people I see, I can affect the cashier at the grocery store, I can affect
Hmm.
my wife, I can affect like all of these people I can affect. And then if you're on social media, that's a positive thing. It should be, because then now you can affect all these people that don't actually live locally to you, but they're locally in regards to their direction or their
Absolutely.
path, their access to you.
Hmm.
And that's where it can be extremely positive. So that's kind of how I look at it, is like just reverting back to like acting locally. Like, cause it's like you're just not gonna be fulfilled fighting other people's wars. And that can come off very unempathetic, but that's not how I mean it.
No,
You
I
know,
hear you.
but it's
I
just knowing the truth. It's like the truth of the
mm,
matter of like, I can only do so much, you
mhm.
know? So
And it comes at a cost. It's like
mhm.
I can if I and there are people that do it and they do it quite well. There's people who stand up and petition and go to these, speak
Yep.
at things to make a change.
Yeah.
That's not me.
Yeah.
That's incurring more stress onto myself. And in turn, then the people who are in my day to day life locally, I am not the best version of myself with and for them.
Yeah.
And so now I have a net negative effect against my potential positive effect, right? I'm not
Uh-huh.
being who I could be with the people that I actually see day to day. And therefore, that's just, that's a loss. I think Jordan Peterson talks about it a bit too. It's like, you can be so much more.
Right.
And that's not like, that's exciting to know
Mhm.
versus like, I'm a fuck up. It's like, maybe, and you could not be,
Right.
right?
Yes. Yeah, yeah,
How
yeah,
sick
yeah.
is that, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. This is possible for you. Yeah, and I think the cost is an important aspect. It's like I don't think it's entirely uncommon these days for someone to get involved in a Twitter argument or a
Yeah.
Facebook argument or something like that, and they become exhausted, irritable, tired, and then they're not they don't really spend, then they just, zone out with Netflix, and it's like your whole
Yeah.
family's around you. Like
Yeah.
you don't even have the energy to like
Mhm.
support connections with the people that you supposedly love, but
Yep.
you're just arguing with a fake stranger that doesn't even know you.
About a thing that you wouldn't otherwise know about.
Yeah, yeah, it's a
Right.
weird thing to have like
It's
I find it's a weird thing to have like extremely strong opinions on a lot of these things, or I shouldn't
absolutely.
say that. It's like, no, that's not what it is. Have the strong opinion, but it's if you want, because I have very strong opinions,
Sure.
but I don't care about arguing them. I really
Right.
couldn't care less if anyone agrees with me,
Right.
but the opinion's strong. But I really
Mhm.
don't care about convincing people. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
I'm
Yeah,
not here to try to debate or change minds. This is what I
yeah.
think and feel.
That's the
Period.
difference. That's the
Yeah.
difference. Is like I don't really I have no interest in well, I shouldn't say that. I have no interest in convincing people that aren't open-minded. If like someone
Mhm.
opens up dialogue and they're like, "Hey, I'm curious about this." I'd be like, "Oh, I'm happy to chat about it. I have strong
Yeah.
opinions about this."
I've got lots
But
to say. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Sure.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But like if someone's initially proven that they are obviously, diametrically opposed to what I think,
Mhm.
like, I could easily just forget that.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Because they're just, to me, they're not real. Like, not that they're not real people, but as
yeah,
soon as they exit my world,
mhm,
I'll probably never see them again. So,
yeah,
like,
mhm.
and that's fine.
Well, and you go back to, like, I like, what I always go back to as well is, like, and this is probably easier to understand as a business owner because then you're forced to, monitor your time
Hmm.
as a commodity, but for the average person, they probably find this more challenging, but because I always come back to time, and it's like, if I'm willing to spend an hour and a half total over a week arguing with a stranger on the internet or whatever it ends up being, right?
Hmm.
It's like, I better now spend another 9 hours with my wife to make up
Yeah.
for that. Because like
Yeah.
I just gave this stranger, even though
Access.
I just gave that, yeah, exactly. By giving them your time, you are to an extent giving, even if you're calling them names, you're to an like just by proxy, you're giving them respect. So
Hmm.
like, that's kind of how I look at it. Like time's a big one. So
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, I sure do. It's yeah, if it could be a lack of awareness or a lack of intentionality, right? It's like it just because time just passes either way, and you get in a rabbit hole sometimes, right? And that's well, hence TikTok and things. I've
Yep,
never logged into TikTok. I don't use it, but
yep,
there's a reason. It's because I know I will spend and waste way more time than I care to even think about
yep,
on it because
yep,
that's what it's designed to do. It's designed to trick my monkey brain
yep,
into scrolling on these dumb things.
yep.
So,
Well, and I
yeah,
I struggle with that, like, during COVID because I closed my studio for the initial lockdown, March 2020,
yep,
and then, I was of the belief very soon after that I was like, "This is the biggest scam I've ever heard of." So
yeah,
then so then so then I'm like, I can't on principle, I cannot support this. So I can't comply, like, and it was one of those things where, and a lot of people probably went through this, but, like, I went through that of, like, being inundated by that all day of,
oh yeah,
like, people bombarding me, bombarding them, and having these conversations, and it's like, and then it's like, no, actually, I shouldn't say no one changed their mind. I actually had someone reach out and apologize, which was
one.
interesting.
I
Yeah,
had
yeah.
one. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I had one. And he's a good friend of mine.
yep.
We weren't as close then, but, he changed his mind on a lot of
Imagine.
things. Yeah, 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 yeah. It was cool
Yeah,
though, but, like,
yeah.
yeah, it was one of those things where I'm like, I had to come to terms at one point where I'm like, because I recognized that the frustration I was getting wasn't actually directly what was happening. It was feeling misunderstood. I
Hmm.
couldn't handle people not understanding, especially smart people or people I
Yeah.
thought were smart. And I'm like, how can I couldn't grasp that. So that made me want to continue to argue and explain. And then realizing the cost of that being like, I don't need them to understand me. I think it's more healthy for me
Hmm.
if I learn to accept that it's okay if people don't understand me, and that's okay. And they can make up whatever narrative they want about me,
Hmm.
and the better that I accept that, the more healthy I will be, and the happier I will feel,
Yeah.
So
No, it's a
that was a
lesson
good
in
one.
life. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
honestly, I think that it definitely put things into a pressure cooker in that
Mhm.
sense. It's like there are some hard learned lessons in life coming through hot and fucking heavy, right? Because
Yeah.
it's like there's a lot of stuff right in your face and there's not a lot of people on your side. So
Yep.
who are well, and actually tie it right in questions back on track.
Yeah.
Um, what's been one of the more difficult but important lessons you've learned in life so far?
Good question, dude. Might have to come back to that one because that's a big one. And,
Well, sometimes it's one that's still currently being learned. It's like you can
right.
spot a pattern or a change that needs to happen and just haven't quite
Oh, you
done
know
it,
what? Yeah, yeah, okay. You know what? I have one that's been current and one that I've been working through over the last 6 months and currently working through is, this will make sense because of everything I've spoken about how I operate, my
Sure.
operating system, is I like information, I like data, I like thinking, regardless of the cost it takes on me or the toll it takes, I seem to gravitate towards that. And the problem with that is the more thinking that happens, the less doing has space to
Y-
happen, if that
Yeah.
if I describe that well. So
Yep.
so less thinking, more doing has been a big part of me where it's like, if I want to achieve something, I immediately look for information, which makes sense. But then what happens is I get into a trap of more information, more information, more
Yeah. Where
information.
do I
Instead,
start?
exactly, instead of being like, I have enough,
Mhm.
I just need to do it now,
Yeah.
and imperfect action. I need to be comfortable with
Yep.
just taking imperfect action, screwing it up a little bit,
Mhm.
refining, doing it again, and just go
Yep.
through that process over and over and over again. Because I'm spinning my tires right now if I just continue to consume information.
This is what comes to mind immediately for me, and you take it or leave it. I would almost suggest shifting it into an exercise in humility for yourself
Okay.
versus paralysis by analysis or whatever, and I need to know more or whatever. It's like knowing that what you know now is enough and everything else is the lesson in humility as you start, right? It's like you're going to find out real quick what else you need to know after
Mhm.
you start.
Right.
And that's ties back into your, at least how I'm hearing your line of thinking this whole time. Like,
Yeah.
this is how I can expand my humility and check myself. It's like your, as a check into your North Star in a way.
No, you're probably right, and that's a good I think that's a healthy perspective, so I appreciate that, and I think that makes a lot of sense because it's I do like examining kind of my motives for things that aren't
Mm,
obvious, and even looking at that, it's like, okay, well, it why wouldn't I take action? And then I go back and I actually did this because I recently actually committed to a relatively large, like, business coaching program,
sure.
and, um I've been thinking about it a lot
Yeah,
before I committed to it, right?
of course.
As one does, maybe I did it more than most, but
Well, and
I
there's such a saturated thing too. You got to watch out in that space, right? So,
exactly 100.
yeah,
To be honest, there's a lot of reasons. Some of them valid,
yeah,
some of them not. That one's valid. There's a lot of
absolutely.
them not that just kind of fed that narrative, like, no, no, I need to think more.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and uh, and yeah, that's been really helpful for me because I remember going through that process of like, okay, I feel this way about it. Why? Like, what is motivating me to consume more information and not do anything?
Mhm.
And I came back to what I came back to was there's fear. I have fear, and
Sure.
I have fear around something, and then it's like, okay, is it the fear of failure? And it probably is. Is it the fear of looking stupid? So is that
Mm,
humiliation?
right.
You know, maybe some of that too. And honestly, to tie it in with what you said, which I didn't really see that, but it makes sense, is like, and this ties in with my faith as well, is like to have fear, to have worry is kind of idolatry because it's putting me in a place of importance that is
Yep.
unnecessary and just untrue. It's like, you're not that important, dude. You know what I mean? Like, just do
Yeah.
it. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, and as what I think it was Chris Willick's or Williamson's podcast or somebody, but actually maybe Hormozy, but basically a year after we're dead, there are accountable a number of people who will remember where we lived.
Right.
Right. And so I don't know, some shit, yes, it matters, but like not that much,
Yeah, yeah.
you
Well,
know?
and I do. It's funny because I have a very gentle perspective on death, but at the same time, I've used that because there was maybe Chris said it, but I definitely remember Hormozy saying
Sure.
exactly what you're saying, and I have used that many times where I'm like, man, if I'm nervous, anxious about something, or whatever it is, it's like I just got to remind myself that like one day it just doesn't matter at all, and that means
No.
if it doesn't matter then, it doesn't matter now.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and even to go back to faith, by the time that it doesn't matter, you'll be in heaven anyways.
Right.
So like everything's going to be dope.
Yep, yep, yep,
Right.
yep,
So
exactly, exactly.
yeah,
So it's like I really don't and the way that I look at it is like, and I mentioned this before, is like that is a trigger for me just to develop my relationship with God and be like,
yeah,
this is where I clearly am too chaotic for myself. So
sure.
you know,
Yeah,
leaning on God for this will help me kind of move
sure.
forward and mature in a way that I can handle this better in the future.
It's kind of that acknowledging I am not at the wheel. And so please take the wheel.
Right.
Right. It's
Yeah.
lead it. Yeah. That, or at
Yeah.
least, anyways, that's how I would see it. That's
Yeah,
fun.
yeah, no, exactly, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
and the difference with like, I mean, this you know, you correct me if I'm misrepresenting, but like the difference between someone like yourself or me who don't have the same spiritual beliefs entirely would be just like it's the same exercise, just who's there is different or what's there
Sure.
is different, right? That's
Hmm.
the only difference.
I'm
So
wondering, just as a side note, in terms like thinking about you mentioning kind of getting stuck in a thinking cycle. Have you listened to any like Ram Dass or any of Alan Watts stuff, like his lectures and things?
back in the day a little bit, but I didn't really go down the rabbit hole. Like I have an Alan Watts book I read back in the day. When
Yeah,
I was like really into drugs, I was into that stuff, like
sure.
a little bit more. Yeah.
I would look into, I think it's called Becoming Nobody from Ram
Okay.
Dass. It's
Mhm.
kind of a little lecture series or whatever.
Mhm.
But I really appreciate his humor and
Yeah.
how he kind of keeps it light and fun, but also it's kind of like, oh shit, like it's to me, it is humility. It's the we have very little say to begin with. We just like to feel and think that we might.
Right.
So it's
Right.
kind of that reminder of that overthinking. It's like, okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Stop taking yourself so seriously.
Yeah, exactly. And
Like,
that's
yeah.
why I like Alan. It's all about the game, right? Life is the
Yeah.
game and the
Yeah.
dance.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. He's got some good stuff. I love Alan.
oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, in a sort of separate thought, when have you felt most alive is a question that I have spent some time thinking about.
Mhm.
And so I'm interested when you think about your life and different times that you have felt most alive, what comes to mind?
Yeah. So I've never actually thought about that question, but because, and probably partly this is clouded by just the fact that it's recent memory, but getting married probably. I got
Sure.
married in January. So, yeah,
Congrats first.
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. So pretty recent. And like that was probably a good that's probably a good example when I look back. I'm like, yeah, that probably works because that did feel very different. That you know what I mean?
Right.
That day felt different than all the other days I've existed.
Hmm.
As far as like
Could I
maybe
ask
not
just to describe that a
yep,
little more? Like, how do you mean it felt different than other days? And I completely hear you, but
yep.
I'm curious how you would describe it.
I think partly because probably because of all the stuff that like we'd gone through leading up to that, like anyone does, your own journey of just
Absolutely.
becoming closer and then being like, this is this is the pinnacle of deciding that closeness forever. And then you pair that with the forever part where it's like it's almost uh like I think marriage has like a culturally it gets clouded by the party very
Hmm.
much, like the event. But for me, the event, which we did it very small, but it was perfect. It went exactly how we wanted. Had our parents, a few close friends. It was awesome. And then just our immediate family and whatnot.
Yep.
But I think for me, the event, the day, it triggered a more existential feeling. So that's what made it feel bigger to me. Is it wasn't just like a milestone, which I think probably some people feel where it's like, oh, this is a big deal
Yeah.
because it's a milestone, you know?
Yep.
And everything's very, when you think about it from a milestone, it's like a very earthly milestone of time and space and materials and the natural
Yep.
world. But trying to describe it, it's like for me, it was way more metaphysical, if that makes sense. It just was like way more existential of like, whoa, I am now tethered to this person, not just physically or making a contract with the state, which a lot of
Mhm.
people love to reduce it down to, and I hate that because I think they're missing the most important part about it, which is what I was thinking about, which is just this like existential spiritual connection that I now have with my wife. She's deciding to make it with me. I'm deciding to make it with her, and it's forever.
Mhm.
And forever is just like a word, but then if you think about it, it's way heavier.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
You're implying not only this life, like this version of reality.
Yeah. 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 Like, because I do believe that, our decisions at the same time, and I know that this can kind of come off maybe contradictory to what we were saying before, where it's like, hey, man, stop taking yourself so serious. It doesn't really matter in the grand scheme. But I think in a lot of ways, the way that we act here does affect eternity in some way.
Mm.
And I just don't
Mhm.
know how.
Sure.
And I think a lot of people from a faith perspective look at that from this is a very like a Catholic way of looking at it to throw them under the bus would be just like, if I do this, I get to heaven. And that's not how I mean it. I mean it more like I'm already going there, but just
Yeah.
the that decisions that I choose to make along the way kind of set the tone
Mhm.
for my next step into the next realm, you
Sure.
know? Yeah.
No, and I completely agree through a different lens.
Mhm.
Your that statement of the decisions we make now can and will affect eternity. I just don't know how.
And I really don't know how. So even if you're gonna ask me like,
Yeah.
what does that look like? I'm like, I don't really know. So
No.
I guess that's just a loosely held belief that I guess I cling to with zero evidence. But it's like,
Yeah.
but it's one that it felt that way at the very least. So going back to your initial question of like feeling alive,
Mhm.
I'm like that process, that feeling of like the suit didn't matter, her dress didn't matter. Like it
Yeah.
did, but like it didn't. It's like
Mhm.
what really mattered was like the contract that we were making with God in that moment, and our parents and the souls that their bodies inhabit were
Mhm.
all part of what we were doing. And like
Sure.
that's the coolest thing ever in my opinion.
No, that's awesome. Yeah.
Mhm.
Where did you go? Just as a side question, where did you get married?
We went to town hall here in the town I grew up in.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we just did we had our parents, photographer, videographer, and the town clerk, and then yeah, it was awesome. It was like 20 minutes or whatever it was, under a half
Yep.
hour, I guess.
Yep.
And then we went, did our photos with family, all of our siblings and whatnot. And then we ended up going out for dinner to our favorite restaurant in Orangeville, actually, and then
Yeah.
just had a small little get together at my parents for like the last few hours of the night. It was awesome.
Cool. No, that's
Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah, it was
My
cool.
my first wife, we got married in the living room with my nieces, my parents, my brother, and like my
Yeah.
sister,
Yeah.
and we just went to lightning bowling after.
That's
You
cool.
know, gets
Yeah.
like it was. Yeah, I mean, anyways, as a side note, it's not
Yeah.
about in the sense of it's not about the details. It's just like this is what fucking matters to me.
Yeah.
I don't need a big party and a
Well,
bunch of stuff,
and
right?
you know what? This is the thing too, is like when I say that, I can recognize that it can someone else could probably take that on as some judgment where it's like, oh
Sure.
yeah, all your big weddings or you whatever. But it's
It's
like
just first. It's you. It's not about them.
that's what I mean. It's like
Yeah.
honestly, if that's what matters to you, then that's how you should do it. Don't do it
Yeah.
like me if it's not what aligns with your values. But
Yep.
ours couldn't have fit
Yeah.
like me and my wife's values like that couldn't have like fit our values more perfect, you
Yep.
know?
Well,
So
that's it. If for anyone who wants to get married and wants to invite me, I'll gladly go and support you. I'm
mhm.
not, it's not because it's not about me as a guest. Like, I don't think you should have a big wedding. Like, I don't give a shit what you do. It's awesome that you're
Yeah.
happy, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. Well, and to
So,
be honest, like, I mean, as a participant, I'd prefer you to have a big wedding,
sure,
selfishly,
sure.
because it's like this is more fun for me. So,
Yeah,
and I
yeah,
know it's not about me, so I say that kind of jokingly, but like
of
at the same
course.
time, I'm like, I'm all game for you to have a big wedding because I'm gonna have a ton of fun.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Um, Kind of to start to wrap things up a little bit, I do like to ask about people's natural gifts.
Hmm.
And I really do believe that we all have natural gifts that we come into this world with that we can either cultivate or not. And so I'm interested, like, what do you see as some of your natural gifts or one of your gifts would be?
Um, I think related to my work, and I understand for a lot of people, you could go down the rabbit hole of like work being your identity and maybe that being an unhealthy whatever. And I would agree. But I find so much fulfillment in my work.
Hmm.
And the more that I do it, I really do think that like I'm in a place where I've been blessed where I can give my gifts to people that God has given me. So
Hmm.
so whatever coaching is made up of, it's like it's coaching. Like I really do think like I'm a good coach. And I
Hmm.
think that I'm naturally good as a good coach. So I think it's one of those things that does come easy to me. And I've continued to improve it because I like to do it and I'm motivated to get better at it. But I do think like I know that's not really a gift because it's a collection of gifts,
Hmm.
but I think I'm just good at doing that. And I think that's something that's been given to me naturally.
What, I guess, like, what would come to mind then when you think of the pieces of that? Like, obviously, my mind goes to communication and then not only that, but then the interest in the information side as well, like the actual
Yep.
more
Yep.
objective side of things. But what's that to you?
I think a big part is like empathy.
Mm,
So like when it comes to coaching is like really trying because ultimately with coaching, it's like you're trying to get people from A to B because they're struggling on their own to get from A to B. And if that's the case, then that means they've got a collection of barriers that they're living with, some of them under their control, some of them not. So I think a good coach would be able to identify what those things are. And then that's the first step. And then I think the next step is like get them to identify what those things are. And then the next step is like getting them to, I should say, asking questions in a way to get them to be motivated now that despite all of those things, they can get to step B. And I
Mhm.
think that's like that's kind of the magic of coaching that's really hard to do with certain people and maybe harder for some people. And I don't even mean
Sure.
clients, but for some coaches.
Mhm.
But I've found that I think just easier to do. And like maybe easier isn't the right word. You know what I mean? But it does feel
Yeah,
like
yeah.
it's natural. It feels like I can do it in a way that isn't it
There's
doesn't
less
take a
friction.
yes, it doesn't take a lot of bandwidth and it doesn't feel like it's hard. It feels like I
Mhm.
enjoy it and I'm good at it. And I can get people to that place where they're, maybe looking at themselves and looking at the road ahead in a way
Mhm.
that's completely different than their own kind of environment or self-talk that they had that they didn't even realize they had, but these questions, and I have my own version of that too.
Of course.
But like being that objective voice for them, I feel like I can do that really, really well.
What came to mind, I don't even know how or why, but is the magician with the rabbit in the hat. And it's
Mhm.
almost like you can take someone's hat off and show them that the rabbit's been in there the whole time. It's like they didn't even know. It's the
Right.
tools to do the thing that they've wanted to do for whatever amount of time, and the frustration that they've been experienced for 3, 6, 12 months, 10 years, whatever it is. It's like you already have all the tools it takes. You just need this little bit of guidance or someone to say,
Yeah.
here it is. Like,
Yeah.
where the fuck did you get that? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's always been there.
And one of my favorite that's a good way to put it. And it's the magic there, I think, is to get someone to use that parallel is like if we're trying to get every single client to do their version of that, it's like to get them to take their hands and take their hat off,
Yeah.
it's a completely different road for every single client. So like that's the part that I really, really like.
Yeah. It's,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Leading them to their own outcome.
Yeah. Yeah. I think if I was gonna answer that question in a different way, because it probably, I mean, I'm sure that can come off pretentious because it's related directly to like what I do.
Sure.
But I do think, and I'll be honest, I struggle with this in interpersonal conflict.
Mm,
So I'm not good at in that case, but I am good at, and this ties in with the way that I think, so it makes sense with my operating system that I said, is like I can do a good job in general especially if I'm not heavily emotionally involved.
yeah.
um, I can do a pretty good job of arguing for the opposite opinion that I have.
Mhm.
Like I can get into that place um maybe easier from what I can tell than other people, where it's like,
Yep.
okay, I could see the other perspective. It's like a typical debate exercise, right? That people will do is
Yeah.
like trying to argue for the other side. And I've always been confident that I'm like, man, I really think that I could do that exercise pretty good if I was put in a place where like okay, here's your opinion, but I want you to argue for the opposite. I'm like, ooh, that sounds fun. I think I could do that, you
Yeah.
know?
Devil's advocate. That's what comes to mind for me. Like,
Yeah.
you can just play that role and be like, oh, yeah. Well, I think too, because a certain degree of awareness, but then also self confidence. And like, I am only aware to the degree that I am the holes in my thinking, but
Hmm.
I'm very much aware that there are holes.
Yeah.
Right. And so, I guess to tie it back all the way around to humility and everything, it's like, what the fuck do I know? What does
Hmm.
my opinion even mean to anybody but me? Probably
Hmm.
nothing.
Hmm.
Right. And so, very easy to let go of that. It's like, I'm not attached to that for anybody else's opinion.
Hmm.
So, I'll gladly argue yours if you want. Like,
Well, and like it's that, and it's like truthfully, and this is, the caveat is like if I'm more emotionally involved, it
oh,
will
yeah, of
cloud my judgment like anybody else. So I'm not saying that
course.
I'm this perfectly objective or organism, right? But I am genuinely more interested in understanding the truth about things than I am about being right. And at the
Yeah.
same time, I still want to be right just like anybody else does.
Yeah.
But
Right.
when I'm going through bigger questions of life, whether it's questions of faith or other things, it's like I'm always trying to like argue against that instead of being like just go down the rabbit hole of confirmation bias,
Mhm,
because that's the default rabbit like railroad anyway.
mhm,
So if I can stop there and be like, wait a minute, how could this be wrong?
mhm.
Then to me, I don't do that because it's like, you know, I'm intellectually mature. Like I do it because I actually care about being right. So if I care about like actually what the truth is and I want to be right about that, and that's what I mean by right, is I want to be truthful about it.
Mhm.
um, then I want to actually know. So I want to hold this up. Like I forget what they there's a saying for that, right? Because it's like if you steel man, right? Because if you straw man a perspective, right, you're
Yeah.
misrepresenting it to fit your own narrative. But if you steel man, you're representing as strong as you can the opposite opinion, for
Mhm.
lack of a better term. I think that's how you describe it, right? So
Yeah.
I'm always trying to steel man it if I can.
You're reinforcing your belief by arguing against it.
Right.
Like, honestly and
Yeah.
truthfully trying to argue against it
Yep.
can reinforce where you're at and be like, "No." And that's one of the things too. I find in today's world, a lot of people are trying to change who they are, and I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. However, I would encourage a step of checking in whether it is something you want to change or not first, right?
Right.
There are a lot of aspects of my personality that people probably don't like, and a lot of them I fucking do. So I
Right.
have no interest in changing that
Hmm.
despite anyone else. Right.
Yeah.
And not to say that I don't, there's also things I would like to change for the better, but like checking in before you just start down this self improvement or self help book rabbit hole of how can I be better? It's like, yeah, but like you're already complete as well. Right. And so
Hmm.
some of those things you can reinforce in time versus try to change. And I feel like you'll be much happier in the long run.
Oh, 100%. I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The self improvement pipeline is an interesting one because it can be
Yeah.
it can be very addictive, but you can also be kind of and there's probably a level of it that is Sisyphean by nature. Like, you know,
Yes.
it's just you are just doing it to do it on principle. But some things you probably don't need to be doing. Like it could be Sisyphean to the point of like, I want to make sure that boulder I'm pushing up the hill, you know, there is a level of productivity that benefits my life in some way and the
Mhm.
lives of those around me, as opposed to only doing it on principle. Because then you
Yeah.
just attack everything and
Yeah.
you're never
No.
actually content.
There's 1,000 boulders, and if you just go push boulders all the time just because they're boulders,
Yeah.
it's just not anyway, that's not it for me either, so, yeah, I
Right.
completely agree.
Right. And it's
Yeah.
kind of it's inherently contradictive probably because it's like you're and fitness is like this because it's like you're always trying to improve but trying to balance that with always being satisfied. It's like, how can you kind of balance those two
Mhm.
things in tandem? You go too far one way or the other, and you end up not going the way you want, or at least not being happy. Like, you know, if you go too far down the rabbit hole of self improvement, then what are you actually achieving with that? Because you're never actually happy. And then the other
Right.
way, you never actually do anything because you're just content with everything the way it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, then on goes the pendulum,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Um, yeah, I guess one of my last questions is about advice, and I guess I'm wondering if there was one piece of advice that you consider to be Tim Walcott advice for life, what would it be?
Again, just because I'm going to reiterate something I said before, and I think it's
Please
just
do.
because it's recent for me, and
Mhm.
I recognize I have not surmounted this mountain yet, but it's if that's the right way to say it, but yeah, surmounted this hurdle obstacle, but it's like I I see how profound it can be, and I think it's the lesson of recognize when your thinking becomes masturbatory
Mhm.
and you're not taking action. So it's like I really do think if you have a choice, if you had a choice and you could just click a button and you could be, you know, more impulsive and then less of a thinker, I
Yeah.
would choose impulsive all day because you know if we were on Earth forever, maybe not because you're living forever on Earth. But
Yeah.
like we know that time is finite from an earthly perspective, and we know how most of us understand how the aging process works. It's like this what the process of life. You know, if you're blessed to live into an old age, it's like we know how that goes. That's not a
Yeah.
mystery. So and life changes and other people change and what your abilities are those all change everything. So I think it makes sense to when you understand the, you know, the profoundness of time. I think it's important to take action. I look at that and I'm farther on the spectrum of conservative behavior.
Mhm.
In most cases anyway, not all, but most cases. And I've been trying to identify that and then move myself down the spectrum towards what I might, my narrative around it would be like, oh, that's impulsive because that has a negative connotation to it. So then that
Mhm.
helps me feel safe or confirms why I'm not taking action. When really it's
Right.
like, you can call it whatever you want, but like you should be doing stuff. So I
Yeah.
think that's probably
Sure.
the lesson is like recognize if you're that, and I see, it's one of those things, of course, when you start going through something, you see it in everybody else. And it's like so easy to see other people. It's like they say they're going to do something and you're like, huh, you told me that 9 years ago. You told
Yeah.
me it last year. You told me it 4 years ago. It's like, and I'm like, I do not want to be that guy. Like I
Mhm.
really do not. And so if I see my, you see the parts that you hate about yourself and other people,
Yeah.
and I'm like, I really don't want that to be me. So I'm very vigilant with myself recently on doing that. So that would probably be my answer for that is like just recognize when you're recognize when you have enough information and take action. And when in doubt, if you don't have enough information, just do it anyway. The answer is
Right.
probably just to do it,
It's the
you
what's
know?
the measure twice, think or cut once, but it's like measure once, cut twice. It's like the
Yeah,
opposite
yeah, yeah.
almost, right?
Yeah,
It's like
yeah,
the
seriously.
I don't know, just fucking measure it and cut it and get it done.
Well, you know what's funny about that too? Because that's a classic one, right?
Yeah.
And it makes sense. That's why it's like that can be a trap for someone like me because I like it when things make sense because then I can rely on my logic and reason, which I don't think is always a good way to live
Mhm.
because it can trap you. And it's like you look at that and you're like, or you hear that phrase and you look at that phrase and you go, okay, measure twice, cut once. That makes sense because I don't want to waste things.
Yeah.
But if I'm going to waste things, maybe I guess you could argue, okay, it goes back to wasting time. So I guess you could, in theory, waste time, but you could be wasting time if you measure twice, measure 3 times, measure 4 times. Because that's the problem. If we're going to parallel it, I guess that's the problem is you end up measuring 12 times and never making the cut.
Yeah.
So, or however many times. So it's like, it's almost
Yeah.
like just make the cut. And then what's the cost? The cost is like, I have to pay for another drywall sheet. It's like,
Mhm.
whoop de doo, dude,
Yeah.
So just
Well,
do it.
this my mind goes to what's the goal? Is the goal to cut the drywall or is the goal to build a house?
Right. Right.
You just take one more step back, like, because you focus in, I don't want to
Yeah.
waste material. It's like, what do you want to do? Well, I'm trying to
Yes.
build a shed.
Yeah.
Is the shed built? No. Let's fucking start there. Like, what needs
Yep.
done to build the shed? Cut the goddamn sheet. Get it
Yes.
done.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Exactly. No,
On
that's a
with
good
the
way.
day.
Zoom out, right? That's what
Yeah.
that is. It's like zoom out. Like, what is the ultimate goal here? It's not to cut the drywall, it's to build something here.
Yeah. Well, that's in my mind, you can always, if you zoom in or out, it will always help you to a solution.
Hmm.
But it's discerning which of those apply that I
Hmm.
feel is one of the gifts that I have is generally from an outside perspective, like, what's going on here? And then
Yep.
it's like, oh, you're trying to build a shed. So
Yeah.
I know, here's a suggestion. Or, oh no, you're trying to like fine tune a, okay, then it matters. You want to measure 16 times.
Hmm.
Absolutely. But sometimes you
Yep.
don't.
Yep. I think that's like this is kind of a side tangent, but just reminded me of it because I've been working through this in my head as well, is
Yeah,
like philosophy of money.
sure.
And I don't know where you stand on that, but some people are cheaper than others, and some people are more impulsive with finances than others. And um, I've there's a lot of like underlying beliefs that kind of lead to those behaviors, and that's been one that I've seen in myself even, and it actually ties in with my you know conservative lack of choice around committing to this program that I wanted to do
Mm,
is the money. And what I came back to was, first of all, if I'm frugal to the point that I'm trying to keep up some type of nest egg so that I can sleep at night or whatever I'm trying to do, just more. It's like that's putting this go and then this comes back to my faith is like I'm putting money in a place where it shouldn't be.
of power. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny too because I've thought about this because a lot of people who are more frugal with money will sometimes cast judgment on people who are impulsive because they'll cast judgment on people who are impulsive because they'll buy more things and then by extension be like they have more things so they worship money. when
Mm,
it's I almost see it as the opposite. They
mhm.
actually don't. And maybe some of them don't respect it enough, so they
Sure.
need to come back the other way. But if we're talking about the person who's initially casting the judgment, it's like they should identify themselves, and the fact that they are so afraid of losing money for whatever reasons, and some of them valid. Some people go through certain things in life, whatever. Um, that they actually are worshiping it. They're putting it in a place that it doesn't deserve to be in because it's ultimately just money.
Yeah.
And bad things happen. But looking at it, how I've been looking at it, especially as a business owner, is like if I lose money, I can make more money. And
Mhm,
if I don't believe I can make more money, and that's my fear, I now have a confidence issue with myself.
mhm.
So I should be comfortable spending this money. And then the
Or
second
you're
layer,
working out of alignment, right? That could be
yes.
a what do you call that? Anyways, the light in the
Yep.
cave of like
Yep.
something to pay attention to.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. So, yeah, so even as far as like the recommendation to just do more, honestly, I think, and I know this is a maybe a unpopular contradict or controversial opinion to make nowadays, but like I think people should spend more money. And
Mm,
maybe they're not spending money on the right things, so you could argue about allotment, but
sure.
like I think people should spend more money because in a lot of cases, it's like I even thought about it with this program that I paid for,
Mhm,
just to use it as an example because it's the biggest one right now. And I use this filter now. It was a good learning experience for me because I use this filter with even smaller financial decisions. And I use it if my wife asks me like things that she's trying to work through, like, oh, should I get this? Should I not? Or whatever. But I'll use it with myself still of just like, if I spend this money on this thing, does my life change at all financially? And
mhm,
if it doesn't, just get the thing that you really want, you
mhm,
know? And it might be yeah, it might be what am I trying to think of? Maybe it's something more materialistic. Of course, when you talk about, fitness or some type of self-improvement thing or a business program, in the ideal situation, that is a pretty good investment in most cases. So you can look at that a little bit different. So it's like, oh, you should probably be even more aggressive in a situation like that,
right.
you
Well, and
know?
skill, anything that's a skill,
Yeah.
uh, it can't be taken away, right? So regardless of money, once you acquire the skill, it's there forever.
Hmm.
So and
Yep.
then, outside of debilitation or whatever, but
Yep.
in
Yep.
general, it's a pretty good bang for your buck when you're investing
Yep.
into something, learning and skills.
Yep.
You really can't go wrong.
It comes back to the whole death thing too, dude. It's like you can't take the money with you. So, you know what I
No,
mean? Yeah.
no.
So make sure everybody around you is looked after. As long as it's not irresponsible to that regard, then it's
Yep.
like I think people should spend it more because like you can really, and I mean if you're into handbags and watches or whatever your thing is, whatever, right? Like
Sure.
everybody's into their thing. But I think a lot of people attach like spending money to like materialist items. Like money buys you access to experiences, to people,
Absolutely.
to places, and those are all very fulfilling,
Mhm,
so I think like that's, money's just a tool to get you there.
mhm. No,
Yeah.
I think that's beautiful. Um, where can people get a hold of you, Tim? What do you have anything you wanna websites and things to direct people to?
Probably like, do most of the people listen to this on Instagram? Like you promote this on Instagram mostly
Yeah,
or where? Yeah.
Instagram. I do a
If
YouTube, but more of it's
Okay.
on, like, Spotify, Apple, so
Okay. Yeah, no, my like I'm active on Facebook and Instagram, mostly Instagram for sure. So my profile's Tim_MSHC. And then I'll plug my podcast on here too if you don't mind.
please do, yeah.
Yeah. Because if you guys like podcasting, obviously you have your kind of take, and then we kind of have ours. And ours is a little bit. I do it with my wife, and just to give people a little bit of an idea, because I know you've heard a couple of the episodes, but
Mhm,
it's not a fitness podcast. There's fitness in it, but there's a lot of different conversations. Like Sam and I actually open up about some pretty vulnerable challenges we've had within our relationship. um we obviously, the fitness is in there for sure. We take questions from clients and different people around nutrition, fitness, things like that, or our own training. I do a lot of powerlifting. Sam does the bodybuilding thing, so we're chatting about that. But then there's a lot of other things, just like social issues and just like, and we talk about our faith and things like that in there. I talk about my challenges around mental health and drug addiction, using hormones, supplements, all that stuff. So,
mhm.
so yeah, the name of that is State Peak. So that's on YouTube as well, Spotify too. So
Yeah. I will say shout out to your production quality. Sounds great, looks great, definitely professional, so from like,
that's all our producer, man. Alex is awesome. He's a
yeah.
machine.
Well,
Yeah.
I will attest to that. So
Yeah, he's a champ. He knows what he's doing. So we're just the
good.
talent. We just walk in and blab. So
Yeah, that's all. And that's it's. I'm glad that I'm learning the skills and just drudging through for myself
yeah,
for now. But
yeah,
it's like, oh yeah, that seems like a great idea.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
100%. And he wants to get to that point. You're probably actually not too far away from him. It might be an hour or something. Like it might not be too
Okay.
crazy because he's out. How close are you to like Listowel area or Stratford?
Oh yeah, I'm an
Or is
hour
that
from Listowel.
Yeah, okay. Because he's I don't know. All those towns kind of blend together to me. They're all just in the middle of
Sure.
Mennonite farm country. But
Absolutely. Yeah,
but
yeah.
he's out that direction anyway.
Huh.
And maybe a little bit closer to Stratford. But he wants to he has the podcast studio all set up. So I think he wants to start building that out and doing more podcasts for people and stuff. So
Cool.
yeah,
Do
yeah,
you guys go to him?
yeah, yeah,
Oh, that's
yeah,
sick. I
yeah,
didn't know.
yeah, yeah. No, it's cool.
Mental note.
It's a good setup for sure. He's
Well, if
done a
you're
good
ever
job.
coming this way, Goddard, I'm in Goddard, so just along the lake.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Come
Yeah.
on up. We'll hit some weights.
Oh, dude, 100%. That's I'll definitely let you know because I love it up there. It's awesome.
We're in the time of year where Goddard is a hot commodity. The sunsets are beautiful and it's
Yeah.
just tough to beat. So
Yeah.
post competition or something, if yeah.
Yeah. That's when we'll be doing our adventures for sure. Well, it depends on kind of what her specific plan is with competing, but basically
Yeah, yeah.
we kind of say it's the second half of the year is when we kind of open things up a little different. So,
Sweet.
yeah,
No,
man.
it'd be great to have you out, man. Like can
Cool.
hit a session and whatever,
Cool, dude.
catch up.
Yeah. 100%, man.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time and connecting, man. It's great to learn more.
Yeah, Bill, I appreciate you having me on, man. I was really excited when you reached out because I don't know. I'm like you seem to enjoy this stuff. I love chatting, so like if
Yeah.
someone wants to do a podcast, I'm always game for it. So
Dude, and that's it. It's
yeah,
the connection. It's the learning. It's what's the experience been like for you on this whole planet thing, you
yeah,
know? Like,
yeah,
I don't know. It's
yeah.
part of the fun.
It's the value of the internet, man. Connect so many like minds, different and also unlike minds. Just different people.
Absolutely.
So it's cool. No, I really appreciate you having me on, dude.
It's been a pleasure.